It was nearly 2 in the morning when Jack Tolliver wheeled his big Peterbilt into the rest area just off Highway 81, bone-tired and bleary from a long, unbroken haul through the heart of Kansas. The night was empty, no taillights ahead, no moon above, just the long sigh of wind sweeping across the prairie and the lonesome rumble of his own engine. He'd been chasing the white lines for so long, his eyes ached, and all he wanted was a cup of coffee and a few hours of dreamless sleep before the dawn turned the fields silver. The rest stop was barely lit, a single flickering sodium lamp throwing lazy yellow halos across cracked concrete. There were only 3 vehicles, a battered minivan hunched by the bathrooms, a sedan half swallowed by shadow, and out at the farthest edge of the lot, a single semi, long and silver, with its lights off and windows dark. Jack rolled to a stop near the vending machines, engine idling as he rubbed his hands over his face, trying to will himself awake for just a little longer. But something tugged at him, a tickle of unease, a flicker in the corner of his eye. He glanced across the lot at the lone rig parked nose out at the very edge of the lights. It was just the angle, he told himself, maybe a trick of exhaustion, but as he squinted through the glass, he saw a flash of blue and white license plates catching the glow from the lamp, and for a moment he froze. The numbers, the letters, even the fading sticker in the corner, they looked exactly like his. No, he thought, shaking his head, it had to be a coincidence. There were 1,000 rigs on the highways, a dozen states, with plates that looked almost the same, but his stomach twisted anyway, a low ripple of cold crawling up his spine. He left the engine running and stepped out, boots scraping the gravel. The prairie night was wide and silent, a living thing pressing close around him. He walked around to the front of his rig, heart thumping a little too hard, just for his own peace of mind. He dropped to one knee and checked his plates. KS 3172 AL, the same battered corner, the same half-peeled sticker. He ran his thumb over the rusty edge. Still his, still real. He looked back at the other truck. From here, he couldn't quite make out the numbers in the darkness, but something about the shape, the outline of the grille, the streak of paint, set his nerves jangling. It wasn't just similar, it looked exactly the same as his own Peterbilt. Same make, same year, same streak of red along the fender where he'd clipped that pole last winter. Jack forced himself to laugh. "All right, Jack," he muttered. "You're just dog-tired. Your mind's making shadows." He paced across the lot, footsteps echoing in the cold. The grass at the edge swayed with the wind, and the lamp above the other rig buzzed, spitting with the promise of a coming storm. Jack hesitated, eyeing the dark cab. The windows were tinted, impossible to see inside. The rig itself looked cold, shut down for hours, with no sign of life. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. He stepped closer, ducking his head to check the plates under the beam of his flashlight. KS 3172 AL. He blinked, leaned in, and checked again. Same number, same state, same ragged sticker curling at the edge. He ran his hand across the metal and felt the chipped paint in the exact place he'd scratched it years ago. The back of his neck prickled. Someone was playing a trick on him, or he was deeper in the weeds of exhaustion than he'd ever been. He glanced over his shoulder at his own truck, parked 50 feet away. It gleamed in the yellow light, streak of red on the fender catching the glow. Jack spun back to the twin rig. Same paint, same mud splatter, even the lucky coin he'd glued beside the step still stuck in place on this stranger's ride. He straightened, suddenly cold. "No way," he whispered, breath smoking in the chill. "No way in hell." He tried the door, locked. He knocked, half expecting someone to jerk awake and cuss him out. Nothing. The cab stayed silent, dark, the windows reflecting only his own puzzled face. He circled the truck, searching for any sign that this was a joke, a decal, a crew with a camera waiting to pop out laughing. But the night was empty, nothing but the rush of wind through the grass, and the distant moan of a passing train. Jack felt a ripple of something close to fear. He pulled out his phone, thumbed a quick text to Rick, his oldest friend, another trucker running a few hours behind him. "Hey, weird question. Ever see a rig with your exact plates? No signal. Typical out here." He stared at the cab again, heart thudding. Inside, he could just make out shapes: a mug in the cup holder, a flannel shirt tossed over the seat, a faded photo taped to the dash. For one wild second, Jack thought the photo looked familiar, but the shadows made it hard to see. He swallowed, skin crawling. A gust of wind slammed the cab door in his face. Jack staggered back, nerves jangling. He forced a laugh, but the sound died in the empty lot. He was alone, but he didn't feel alone. And as the prairie night pressed tighter, Jack realized sleep would have to wait. Something here was waiting for him in the dark. Jack stood there for a long minute, the strange rig's chrome grille grinning back at him, his breath fogging the window as he tried to see past his own reflection. He pressed his palm to the cold glass, heart pounding, trying to peer through to the cab's interior. The shadows inside shifted as the overhead lamp flickered, making the clutter in the cab look eerily familiar. There, in the cup holder, an old metal coffee mug, battered with a blue swirl around the rim. Jack had one just like it, bought it from a flea market in Wichita years ago. It even had the dent from where he'd dropped it in the truck stop parking lot. He shivered, brushing it off as coincidence, but every detail pressed tighter. The plaid flannel shirt on the seat, same faded green and black checks as his own. The beat-up logbook open on the dash, a stub of pencil rolling in the crease. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, as he studied the photograph taped above the wheel. A group of people gathered at a picnic table, a sunburned man with Jack's own crooked grin in the center, arms thrown around a woman, and a pair of kids Jack didn't recognize. He recoiled. That wasn't possible. He never took that picture. He didn't know those people. But the face in the photo, his face, as sure as anything, smiled out at him. Jack stumbled back, breath short. He looked at his own hands, as if expecting them to look different too. The night air was colder now, or maybe it was just the fear threading through his veins. He reached for his phone again, holding it up for a signal. Nothing but the empty battery icon, flickering red before it went black. "Perfect," he muttered, pocketing the dead device. His gaze drifted over the cab. There was even a rip in the driver's seat, right where the stitching had given out last winter, the foam peeking through. The air freshener, a plastic cowboy boot, hung from the mirror, faded and spinning slightly as the wind worked its way through a cracked window seal. Jack pressed his fist to his forehead, trying to will himself awake. Exhaustion and adrenaline warred in his gut. Maybe it was a prank, he reasoned, some long-lost friend having a laugh, or a coincidence, a doppelganger's ride, dumped here by pure cosmic chance. But deep down, he knew better. This was his rig, or some echo of it. He circled to the back, boots crunching on the grit. The trailer's number stenciled in chipped black paint was the same as his, right down to the crooked two. At the end, he checked the license plate again. KS 3172 AL. No question. He even ran his finger along a scratch under the taillight, a memory of backing too close to a rusty barrel years ago. Same mark, same rust. Jack's stomach churned. He looked up at the night sky, searching for something: stars, an explanation, anything. But the clouds swallowed all the answers. For a moment he considered climbing back in his truck and driving away, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Curiosity held him in place, stronger than fear. He glanced across the lot. His own rig waited in the dim glow, every detail now seeming slightly surreal, as if he might wake up and find both trucks gone. He looked back at the twin, noticing movement, A flicker in the side mirror, a shadow just out of view. He stared, pulse hammering, but saw nothing when he stepped closer. His hand trembled as he reached for the other rig's door handle again. Locked, unmoving, like before. He pressed his forehead to the glass, feeling the cold seep into his skin. The sudden noise, a faint metallic clink from inside the cab, sent him stumbling back, heart in his throat. He forced himself to stand his ground.
Hello?
He called, voice loud in the emptiness. The minivan and sedan by the bathrooms remained lifeless, their windows dark. Only the wind answered, hissing through prairie grass, rattling the old vending machines. He tried to call Rick again, out of habit, forgetting his phone was dead. He stepped back, rubbed his hands together, and stared at his own reflection in the window. Behind his face, the cab was filled with shadows, and the lingering sense that something was just out of sight, waiting for him to look away. Jack's mind raced with memories, long nights, lost highways, regrets too heavy to name. The strange familiarity of this scene made him wonder if he'd been here before, or if this was a dream he'd had and forgotten. The wind carried a chill that crept into his bones, urging him to turn away, but still he lingered, studying every detail. He needed proof, something, anything to explain away the fear settling in his chest. He returned to his own rig, and found it unchanged. He checked his plates, checked the lucky coin glued beside the step, even peeked inside the cab to see the same mug, the same shirt, the same logbook open on the dash. He looked up and saw the reflection of the other rig in his mirror, looming at the edge of the lot, as if watching him back. Jack leaned against his truck, staring at his double, questions gnawing at him. Was this a warning, a trick of the mind, or something stranger still, something only the lonely, endless road could offer? He stood in the restless prairie wind, afraid to move and more afraid to leave, trapped between two versions of himself, both waiting for dawn. The hours dragged by, as Jack paced the cracked concrete between the two rigs, restlessness gnawing at him with every pass. His body was heavy with fatigue, but his mind spun, unable to let go of the impossible sight before him. His own truck, down to the smallest scuff and stain, parked in the shadows like a memory come alive. The prairie wind picked up, carrying the distant howl of a freight train, but the rest area itself remained eerily still, as if held in a pause just for him. He checked the other vehicles again. The minivan and the sedan were untouched, windows fogged, their interiors dark. No movement, no signs of life. The world felt shrunk to the circle of sodium light, and the two gleaming rigs, the rest of the night stretching away, vast and unknowable. Jack glanced at his watch, nearly 3:30. The urge to just crawl into his own cab, lock the doors and wait for sunrise was strong, but the double rig held him in its pull. There were too many questions, too many coincidences piled up like freight at a jammed-up dock. He watched the strange truck for any hint of movement, a flicker in the window, a shift of shadow, anything. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed from the direction of the twin rig. Jack straightened, his heart leaping into his throat. He stared hard at the darkened cab, every muscle tensed. There, another thud, softer this time, like the sound of boots shifting on metal. He swallowed. All right, Jack, just a driver, just some guy playing a joke. He forced himself forward, footsteps crunching with each step. He circled the front of the duplicate rig, squinting up at the windshield. A shape moved inside. Jack froze. The shadow in the cab was unmistakable, a bulky outline in the driver's seat, head bowed as if dozing or lost in thought. Jack's mouth went dry. He rapped on the door with his knuckles. Hey, anybody in there? The figure didn't respond, didn't even flinch. The window's reflection showed only Jack's face overlaying the darkness inside, but as the wind shifted, he caught another glimpse, a face startlingly familiar, jaw set just like his hair, the same shade, even the curve of the nose. It was like looking at a dream, warped by memory and fear. Jack tried the door again. Still locked. He pressed his face closer to the glass, willing his eyes to adjust. The figure raised its head. Their eyes met through the murky pane. His own eyes, unmistakably, but altered, heavier with some knowledge or grief Jack couldn't name. The figure in the other cab lifted a hand, palm outward. Jack felt a chill sweep through him as the man mouthed something, a word, maybe his name, but no sound reached him. The air felt thick, vibrating with the pressure of something about to break. Jack stumbled back, bumping into the side of the rig. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "I'm losing it. I have to be." He clutched the mirror, steadying himself. Just then from inside his own cab, his radio crackled. Jack's head snapped up. He hurried over, yanked open his door, and stared at the CB. Static filled the cab, louder than it should have been, and in it a voice, a perfect mimic of his own, spoke. "You're late, Jack." Jack's blood ran cold. He looked through the windshield, saw the other figure moving in sync with him, a mirrored gesture, every motion matching his own, but just a half-second behind. The wind rattled both trucks, the world shrinking to this weird dance of doubles. He grabbed the mic, voice shaky. "Who are you?" The CB fizzed. Then the voice replied, "The road never ends. Not for you. Not for me." The static built to a fever pitch. Jack covered his ears, fighting down panic. The light above the twin rig flickered, stuttered, then steadied. Through the glass, Jack saw the figure lean forward, mouth something again. This time, Jack read the lips clear as day. "Come see." Before he realized what he was doing, Jack stepped closer, compelled by a mixture of dread and fascination. The window of the duplicate rig rolled down, just a crack, though no hand had moved to do it. The air that rushed out smelled of diesel, rain and something older, old leather, maybe, or the faded ghost of perfume. Jack leaned in. The figure inside smiled, a haunted, knowing twist of the lips. "Come see," the voice repeated, this time impossibly, both from the cab and over the CB radio at once. A pressure built behind Jack's eyes, dizzying and electric, like déjà vu made real. He staggered, nearly dropping to his knees. When he looked up again, the figure inside was gone, the cab empty except for the worn flannel, and the photograph taped to the dash. Jack stumbled away, breath ragged, his mind reeling. Was it exhaustion, hallucination, or had he just met another version of himself, waiting on the edge of the endless road? He didn't know, but he knew he wasn't alone. Not really, not anymore. Jack pressed his palm to his pounding chest, trying to steady himself. The rest area felt tighter than before, as if the world had shrunk to the pool of weak light, circling the twin rigs. The air was thick and strange, pulsing with invisible tension. He wiped a shaking hand across his brow, and looked again at the duplicate truck. The cab was dark, empty, he was sure of it now, but some echo of the figure still lingered in his vision, like an afterimage burned onto his eyes. A low wind swept across the prairie, tugging at the loose edge of his jacket, and whistling through the battered vending machines. The highway beyond seemed 1,000 miles away, as unreachable as the moon behind those racing clouds. Jack caught himself scanning for an exit, a place to run, to escape. There was nowhere to go but back to his own truck, or into the night. Then the lights over the lot began to flicker, not just one, but all of them, buzzing erratically in a strange rhythm. The radio in his cab spat out static, then a wild, ghostly chorus of voices, some familiar, some not. He heard Rick's laugh, his mother's gentle scolding, even the crackled echo of his own voice, telling stories on some far-off night. They layered over each other, growing louder, words melting together, until Jack couldn't pick out a single phrase. He staggered to his own rig, desperate for shelter, and slammed the door behind him. The familiar cab offered no comfort now. Every corner felt unfamiliar, as if someone had rearranged his world while he was outside. His mug sat in the cup holder, but for a moment he could have sworn it was on the dash. The shirt slung over the seat wasn't folded the way he left it. The logbook was open to a page he didn't remember writing, a scroll that looked like his own, that was full of places he'd never been. The radio crackled again, the voice from before whispering through the static. "You ever wonder, Jack, what would have happened if you'd turned left instead of right? If you'd taken a load east instead of west? There are 1,000 versions of you out there, driving all night, lost and found and lost again." Images stuttered through his mind, roads splitting like river branches, different towns, different lives. He saw himself at a dusty crossroads, one sign pointing to home, another to some far-off city. He saw a younger Jack, laughing with people he barely remembered, then an older version, alone in a truck stop, staring into black coffee, as snow fell beyond the window. Suddenly, a blinding light flared from the other rig's headlights, dazzling and unreal. Jack shielded his eyes, but the light seemed to pour into the cab, filling every corner with its searing brilliance. For a heartbeat, he felt himself slip, like falling through a crack in the world. The radio screamed with static, the lights overhead buzzed louder, and for a terrifying instant, Jack felt himself multiplied, his thoughts branching in every direction, his memories fracturing into versions that were and weren't true. He saw himself missing a wedding, taking a different job, calling an old friend one last time, letting go of an old grudge. Every choice spilled out in front of him, endless possibilities stretching to the horizon. In the glare, he glimpsed the figure from the twin rig again, this time standing outside, close enough to touch, face shifting with each flicker of the lights. It was him, but older and younger, sorrowful and grinning, familiar and utterly alien. The figure raised a hand, palm out, and Jack felt something tear open inside. A surge of regret, hope, grief, longing, all the roads he'd never taken, all the lives he might have lived. The chorus of voices on the radio softened. Now he could hear them clearly, some reassuring, some mournful, but all of them his own. "It's not too late, Jack," they whispered. "None of us ever really gets lost, not if we keep moving." The blinding lights snapped off. The world dropped back into the dull yellow gloom of the rest stop. Jack sat panting in his seat, sweat cold on his skin, tears leaking from his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. The twin rig was dark and still, no figure in sight, no sound but the wind. Slowly, Jack opened his door, stepping out into air that felt new, sharp, with the scent of rain. The world was the same as before, but something inside him had shifted. The other truck, his double, looked perfectly ordinary again, silent and cold beneath the flickering lamp. But Jack knew what he'd seen, what he'd felt, 100 different lives, 1,000 versions of himself, all reaching out through the glass. He stood between the two trucks, trembling, as dawn began to seep into the prairie. The storm had passed, but Jack's world would never be quite the same. Jack stood in the slow, pale light, as dawn crept over the prairie, exhaustion and wonder battling in his bones. The air was calm now, scrubbed clean by rain and silence. Behind him, his own rig waited, solid, real, humming gently as it idled. The other truck, his double, sat quiet and unmoving at the edge of the lot, shadowed under the failing lamp. The night's visions lingered, drifting around Jack like mist, but the world felt steadier, as if some storm inside him had finally spent itself. He approached the twin rig one last time, heart knocking slow and heavy in his chest. The headlights and radio were dead silent. The The driver's seat was empty. He could see that now, as the light strengthened, and the last of the shadows retreated. There was no sign of the figure he'd confronted, no sign of movement inside, only that familiar clutter, the mug, the shirt, the old photo, the things that made a life on the road. Jack pressed his hand to the cold door, half expecting it to swing open, to find himself face to face with his own haunted eyes. But the door stayed locked, its metal skin slick with dew. The world was waking up, birds stirred in the grass, a distant train horn moaned, and the sky went pink at the edges, promising another day. He circled the truck, slower this time, taking it all in. The trailer's number, the scratches and stickers, every battered detail, all the same. Only now, in the gentle morning, it seemed less threatening, less supernatural. It was as if the truck had become a monument, a marker for something he'd left behind in the night. At the rear bumper, he spotted something new, a small battered object, resting where the shadow of the trailer met the concrete. Jack knelt and picked it up, a metal keychain, the kind shaped like a tiny compass. The needle spun lazily, but the inscription on the back caught his eye. It was worn, but he could make out the words, "No road is a straight line." Jack blinked, heart thumping. He remembered a night years ago, one of his first long hauls, when his father had pressed a similar compass into his hand. "You get lost, you keep moving, son," his dad had said. No shame in taking the long way around. He stood slowly, clutching the compass. The memory warmed him, made the fear of the night seem smaller, manageable. Whatever he'd seen, hallucination or omen, warning or gift, had left him something to hold on to. Jack looked again, at the duplicate rig. The rising sun hit its windshield, and for a split second, he thought he saw his own reflection, older, maybe, or just more tired, watching him from behind the glass. He smiled, faint but genuine, and tipped an imaginary cap to the figure. "Safe travels," he whispered, "wherever you ended up." As he stepped away, the wind picked up, and for just a moment, he thought he heard a faint echo, a horn, a burst of laughter, or maybe the chorus of voices that had haunted him hours before. But it faded into the sounds of morning, leaving only the prairie, the trucks, and the endless road ahead. Jack returned to his own rig, tossing the compass onto the dash. He sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, and let himself breathe. His own reflection stared back at him from the side mirror, drawn, yes, but clear-eyed. Not just a survivor, but someone finally ready to let go. He checked his license plates out of habit. KS 3172 AL, faded but true, his history etched in scratches and sun-bleached plastic. He traced the lucky coin by the step, thumbed the mug in the cup holder, and smiled. Everything was as it should be, and yet it all felt a little different, as if he'd finally woken up from a long haunted detour. With a deep breath, Jack turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, steady and strong. The world felt wider, full of possibility again. He pulled out of the rest area, gravel crunching beneath his tires. As he glanced in the mirror, the spot where the double rig had been was empty, as if it had never been there at all. Only faint tire tracks in the wet concrete, and the chill of memory proved it had existed. The highway unfurled before him, golden in the dawn. Jack rolled down the window, let the wind rush in, and laughed, a raw, grateful sound. He was still tired, still sore, but something heavy had lifted. The other versions of himself, all those roads he'd never taken, seemed to wish him well as he drove on. As the sun climbed, Jack set his sights on the far horizon. The compass spun quietly on the dash, pointing every which way, a reminder that the road ahead was still his to choose. No matter what he found out there, bad weather, loneliness, new regrets, he was moving forward, and for the first time in years, Jack wasn't afraid of what might be waiting for him at the next stop. The long road had given him back his freedom, and as the day broke open, Jack drove toward it, ready for whatever came, ready to find himself all over again. 700 miles behind him, home was nothing but a faint memory flickering in the back of Dave Mallory's tired mind. He'd left before dawn 2 days ago, the house dark and quiet, the silence broken only by the thump of his boots and the soft click of Max's nails on the tile as his old shepherd followed him to the door. Dave had knelt then, hand buried in the scruff of Max's grey-flecked fur, whispering promises he always made. "Be back soon, boy. Don't cause your mama any trouble." Max had licked his hand, pressed close, then watched him go with sad, wise eyes that seemed to know more about time than any man ever could. Now the road behind was a straight scar, vanishing into the darkness, and the night pressing on all sides felt heavier than usual. Dave's rig ate up the last lonely miles of his haul, diesel engine rumbling, as he aimed for a remote truck stop outside Stanton, a speck on the map, but the only oasis for 100 miles. Rain lashed the windshield in thin sheets, the wipers ticking steady as a metronome. The CB was mostly static, save for the occasional far-off voice, truckers swapping stories or warnings about icy bridges up north. Dave's mind wandered as he drove, memories spooling out in the lull between lightning flashes. He thought of Max, old, slow, but still stubborn enough to chase off the neighbor's cat or bark at every delivery van. The vet had said, gently, that Max was winding down, as if dogs kept their own clocks, ticking toward a goodbye their owners never wanted to hear. Dave had been on the road too much lately, missing meals and walks, missing the little moments that, when they were gone, seemed to matter more than anything. The highway emptied as midnight drew near. Dave's hands ached from gripping the wheel. He counted mile markers to stay awake, humming along with the radio, an old tune that reminded him of summers long past, when Max was a pup and his kids were still small, chasing the dog through golden fields behind the house. He turned off the interstate onto a 2-lane blacktop, headlights sweeping across fields slick with rain. The sign for the truck stop glowed ahead, neon blue and battered, promising showers, hot coffee, pie. The lot was nearly empty, just a couple of big rigs lined up by the edge, a pair of pickups near the diner, and a battered old RV crouched by the fence. Dave swung his truck into a parking spot near the side, close enough to the entrance to see the glow of lights spilling out onto wet pavement. As he killed the engine, the world went quiet, just the hush of rain, the tick of cooling metal, and a strange hush that felt too deep for a place usually buzzing with life. He sat for a moment, rubbing his eyes, telling himself it was just the road catching up with him. That was when he saw movement at the far edge of the lot. A shape trotted out of the shadows near the fence, low to the ground, then paused in the wash of his headlights. Dave squinted, heart skipping, telling himself it was a stray, a coyote, anything but what his mind leapt to. But as the animal moved closer, the limp was unmistakable, the old favoring of the left paw, the quick sharp tilt of the head. The rain blurred his vision. He blinked, hard, then looked again. The dog came forward, head down but tail wagging, and Dave felt the world slide sideways. The markings were perfect, the black saddle fading to gray, the white blaze across the snout, the worn blue collar with its battered tag. Max, his Max. For a moment Dave couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He reached for the door, nearly knocking over his thermos, and stumbled out into the wet. The wind slapped him cold, but he didn't care. "Max," he called, the name bursting out too loud for the hour. "Max, is that you, boy?" The dog froze, ears pricking. Then he bounded forward, awkward but eager, just the way he had every day for a dozen years. Dave fell to his knees on the wet concrete, arms wide as Max barreled into him, whining, wriggling, pushing his nose into Dave's chest. The dog's fur was damp, cold, but real, utterly, impossibly real. Dave buried his face in Max's neck, laughing and sobbing, all the ache of the road falling away. He pulled back, hands searching over the familiar scars, the old ID tag. It was his, bent from that time Max tangled with the fence, name and phone number still legible. "How?" Dave began, voice breaking. He looked around, half expecting to see a family member, a friend, anyone who could have brought Max so far, but the lot was empty, just the glow of neon and rain, the distant hum of the diner's exhaust fan. No one. He hugged Max tight, overwhelmed by disbelief and wonder. "How did you get here, old man? Did you run all this way?" Max only panted, eyes shining, tail thumping. He pressed close, as if he'd never been gone at all. As Dave rose, keeping a hand on Max's collar, the dog leaned against his leg with the weary weight of long miles. The rain eased, a hush settling over the lot. Dave glanced once more at the road stretching back toward home, 700 miles away, and then down at Max, who'd somehow found his way through the night. Some part of Dave wanted to question it, to demand an explanation, but another part, deeper and older, knew better. Sometimes on the road, you just took the miracle as it came. Dave stood there in the wet glow of the truck stop lights, clutching Max's collar, as if afraid the old dog might simply vanish if he let go. The rain had softened to a chilly mist, turning the concrete to glass and blurring the world's sharp edges. For a while neither man nor dog moved, just the hush of their reunion, the patter of raindrops, and the distant drone of highway tires. Max panted and shivered, soaking Dave's jeans as he pressed his weight into his owner's side, solid and warm. It took a long minute before Dave's heart stopped hammering enough for his mind to catch up. He knelt and checked again. Yes, the fur rough and thick beneath his hands, the battered collar with its half-worn tag. Max looked older, maybe thinner, but the eyes were the same. The scar above his eyebrow, the notched ear, the faint musky scent of rain and dog. There was no mistaking him. Dave found his voice, low and shaky. "Is it really you, boy?" Max only licked his hand, as if scolding him for ever doubting. The old dog sat back and sneezed, then gave a single bark, a sound Dave hadn't heard in weeks, hoarse but stubborn. The lot was still empty, save for a pair of headlights that flickered through the mist, belonging to a pickup that barely slowed before rolling on toward the pumps. Dave scanned the shadows, looking for any sign of an owner, a leash, a hint of how Max could possibly have made the journey. Nothing, no one, just the far-off neon hum and the soft glow from the all-night diner's windows. Dave rose slowly, Max glued to his heel. Inside the cab of his rig, he fumbled for his phone, hands trembling as he dialed home. It rang twice before his wife answered, groggy and confused. "Hey, hon," Dave whispered, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. "Is Max with you?" A pause. "He was just in the yard an hour ago." "Why? Is something wrong?" Dave swallowed, mind spinning. No, it's nothing. He's just on my mind." He looked at Max, who sat in a puddle, gazing up as if he understood every word. "Give him a treat for me, okay?" his wife promised, half awake, and hung up. Dave sat there, heart pounding, staring at the dog before him. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be, but the evidence was right there, tail wagging. He led Max to the diner, grateful for the leash he always kept in his glove box. The staff inside stared as the bell jingled. The sight of a soaked, muddy shepherd at this hour strange even for truckers' hours. Dave wiped Max down with a handful of napkins, ordered 2 burgers, one for him, one for the dog, and sat at the counter, unable to stop glancing at his companion, as if the spell might break. The waitress, curious, asked where the dog had come from. Dave just shook his head. "He's mine, but he's supposed to be 700 miles away." The cook made a face but said nothing. Another driver at a corner booth offered a story about a retriever who'd followed a family from Texas to Idaho, but even he sounded skeptical. As Max wolfed down his burger, Dave tried to puzzle it out. He checked the tag again, ran his thumb over the numbers. The same bite mark, the same scratch from the day Max chased a raccoon under the porch. There was no trick, no mistake. He even checked the old dog's left hind paw, where the nail never grew right after an accident, as a pup. It was all there. Afterward, Dave wandered the lot, Max close at his heel. He stopped by every rig, asked the half-awake drivers if they'd seen a dog wandering earlier, if anyone had dropped off a shepherd. No one had. A younger trucker, fiddling with his radio, suggested maybe the staff would know, but when Dave asked inside, the clerk just shrugged. "No dogs tonight, except yours," she said, offering Max a biscuit from behind the counter. Cute though, smart eyes. On a whim, Dave asked if the truck stop had cameras. The clerk frowned, saying the system had been down for days. Something about a bad circuit board waiting for a part. Dave almost laughed at that, though he wasn't sure why. He let Max out to walk under the flickering sign, letting the dog sniff the weeds and fence posts. The dog's steps were weary, but he seemed content, occasionally glancing back, as if to make sure Dave was still there. Later, as they circled the lot once more, Dave felt a chill roll down his spine. The wind shifted, and for a second, he thought he heard distant barking, faint and echoing, as if carried from another world. Max's ears perked up too, his head turning to listen, but he stayed close. There was a feeling in the air, ancient and inexplicable, that made Dave's skin prickle. He crouched and hugged Max again, uncertain if he should be grateful or afraid. The night pressed in, heavy with rain and secrets, as Dave realized this was a miracle he might never understand, one he didn't want to let slip away. Dave spent the rest of the night with Max, never more than a step or two away. They wandered between the rigs and the diner, the quiet broken only by the rhythmic hum of refrigeration units and the clatter of a late-night dishwasher behind the kitchen wall. Max seemed content to sit beneath the diner's awning, head on his paws, watching the steam from Dave's coffee curl into the mist. The dog's presence felt impossibly real, warm, weighty, comforting in a way that made Dave's throat ache. Dave couldn't stop trying to make sense of it. He scrolled through old photos on his phone, comparing every detail: Max's crooked ear, the scar on his left shoulder, the slight white patch on his chest. It was all there, no doubts, no mistakes. He tried searching online for stories about dogs traveling hundreds of miles, desperate to find something, anything, that would make this seem less strange. The articles told of pets trekking across states, reuniting with families against all odds, but those stories all had clues, a chain of events, someone to explain how it happened. Max's sudden appearance had no such trail. At one point, Dave wandered back into the diner to ask the staff if they'd learned anything. The young clerk, who'd given Max a biscuit earlier, shook her head. "Nobody saw him come in," she said, voice quiet. "He just showed up, like he'd been waiting for you." Dave posted in a couple of trucker forums, sharing a blurry photo of Max curled up outside the rig. "Anybody seen this dog hitch a ride?" He scrolled for replies, but nothing came back but jokes or disbelief. "Ghost dog," someone wrote. "Maybe he can fill out a logbook for you." Dave forced a smile, but unease gnawed at him. He tried calling home again. His wife answered, sounding more awake now, the faint hum of the TV in the background. "He's still out back," she said, sleeping by the kitchen door. Dave didn't know what to say. He thanked her, made up an excuse about losing signal, and hung up. That's when things started feeling truly strange. He sat outside on the curb, Max pressed against his knee, both of them watching the headlights of distant cars flicker along the highway. Dave studied the dog's paws caked with red clay, bits of roadside gravel still stuck in the fur. It looked like Max had truly traveled a long way, but his nails weren't as worn as they should be after so many miles. The old shepherd seemed a little thinner, but there was a brightness in his eyes, a look Dave hadn't seen in months. The wind picked up, rustling the plastic wrappers in the gutter. Max's ears pricked, and Dave looked up to see another trucker, a woman with a faded baseball cap, walking her own dog past the edge of the lot. She paused and waved. "Nice shepherd," she called. "He's a sweet-looking old guy." "Yeah," Dave said, voice soft. "He's the best." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you see where he came from?" She shook her head. "Nope. Wasn't here when I pulled in. You know, sometimes I think these old dogs just find their way to us when we need him." She smiled at Max, then moved on. Dave shivered, drawn back into memories. He remembered finding Max as a puppy years ago, shivering under a broken porch in a rainstorm. The way the little dog had followed him home, stubborn and scared but trusting. He thought of all the lonely nights on the road when he'd called home just to hear Max bark in the background, grounding him in the life that waited beyond the asphalt. He pulled Max close, and for a while just sat there, letting old aches and fresh wonder mingle in his chest. The night deepened. At one point Dave nodded off, head resting on Max's shoulder. He dreamed of running through golden fields, Max bounding ahead, the two of them never tiring, never growing old. A banging noise startled him awake. Max was still there, nose pressed to his cheek. The wind had shifted. Somewhere in the distance, another dog barked, answered by a chorus that faded almost instantly. Dave checked his phone. No new calls, no messages. He opened the camera app and snapped a photo, needing proof for himself that this wasn't a dream. He spent the next hour searching the lot again, peering under trailers, checking behind dumpsters, desperate for an answer. At the fuel counter, a pair of older truckers shared stories about pets who'd come back after being lost for years. One even claimed his hound had appeared at his truck after being hit by a car miles away. The line between truth and tall tale blurred in the blue neon light. When Dave returned to his rig, Max was waiting by the door, tail thumping. Dave opened up and let him in, laying a blanket on the passenger seat the way he used to when Max was younger. The dog climbed up, circled once, and curled up, nose tucked under his tail, eyes finally closing. Dave watched him, heart full of awe and confusion. Maybe, he thought, the road was stranger than he'd ever believed. Maybe love was enough to bridge any distance. Or maybe for this one night, he'd been given a miracle he'd never be able to explain. The rain had stopped, the world was quiet, the truck rocking gently as Max slept. Dave stared out at the dark horizon, feeling for the first time in a long while that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Dave sat in the quiet cab, the hush so deep it seemed the world had stopped moving. Max's steady breathing was the only sound, warm and reassuring as the dog sprawled out on the passenger seat, paws twitching in some secret dream. The neon from the diner painted faint stripes across the dashboard. Outside, the truck stop had settled into its loneliest hours, all motion stilled, the last of the late-night stragglers gone to ground. Dave stared out the window, fighting sleep and memories both. His mind kept looping through every possible explanation for Max's presence, logic and longing tangling together until none of it made sense. He half expected to wake up, find the dog gone, and realize the whole night was just a trick of exhaustion and hope. Instead, the night only grew stranger. He caught his own reflection in the glass, drawn face, wide eyes, a look he'd seen in other drivers after too many hours and too many miles. But behind his reflection, he glimpsed movement, a shadow slipping between the pumps, the flick of a tail, the shape of another dog just out of reach. Max pricked his ears, nose twitching, and for a moment, Dave thought he heard barking on the wind, faint overlapping, coming from every direction and nowhere at once. A chill crept along Dave's arms. He remembered the stories the old-timers told in darkened diners, of lost pets finding their people halfway across the country, of dogs and cats returning after storms, after years, after death. He'd always smiled at those tales, comforted by the idea that some bonds couldn't be broken by time or distance. But it was different, now with Max here, and the world so impossibly quiet. He drifted in and out of a doze, memories threading through his dreams. He saw himself younger, running with Max along the muddy banks of the river, laughing as the dog chased sticks and splashed in the cold water. He saw the day Max got hit by a truck, a moment of panic, then relief when the dog limped home, battered but alive. He remembered nights on the road when he'd called home, his wife setting the phone down so he could hear Max bark and whine through the static. Other memories slipped in too, ones he wished he could change. The long hauls that kept him away for weeks, the birthdays and family dinners missed, the times he'd heard Max crying at the door as he left for another run. Regret pooled in his chest, heavy and bittersweet. Sometime after 3, Dave was roused by the static crackle of the CB radio. He reached for it automatically, but all he heard was a patchwork of static and faint, warbling noises, like distant voices and the low whine of a dog, cut by the wind. The sound faded, replaced by silence. Dave shivered, unsettled. He glanced at Max, who raised his head and blinked, eyes bright in the gloom. For a moment, Dave felt a sharp ache, fear that this was the last time he'd see the dog, that come sunrise, Max would be gone as suddenly as he'd appeared. He reached over and scratched behind Max's ear. "You really did come a long way, didn't you, old man?" he whispered. Max sighed, content, and pressed his head against Dave's hand. The truck stop outside seemed changed, as if the edges of the world had grown thin. The wind carried another wave of distant barks, and a shadow crossed the edge of the lot. Another dog, or perhaps just a trick of the light. Dave watched, heart thudding, as the shape paused and seemed to look back at him, eyes shining green in the neon glow. Then it was gone, swallowed by darkness. Dave pulled out his wallet, digging for the old photograph he kept hidden behind his license, a faded shot of him and Max from years ago, both younger, caught mid-laugh on a sun-drenched afternoon. He held it up, comparing it to the dog sleeping beside him. The likeness was perfect, but more than that, there was a feeling, a sense that this night was a gift, a crossing of worlds, a chance to make something right. He leaned back, fighting tears, and let himself remember everything, good and bad. Max's loyalty, his resilience, the joy he brought to every rough day, the nights spent apart, the longing for home. "I'm sorry I left so much," Dave whispered. "I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there." Max raised his head, eyes soft, and licked Dave's hand, a forgiveness older than words. The night held them in its hush, strange and gentle. Dave drifted again, dreaming of home, of fields and laughter, of a dog's faithful shadow by his side. The world outside was still, but inside the cab, love bridged every mile, every loss, every ache. As the first hint of dawn glimmered at the horizon, Dave knew he'd been given something rare, a moment out of time, a chance to say everything he never had before. The road called him onward again. The first gray streaks of dawn crept up behind the diner, painting the truck stop in a gentle, uncertain light. Dave stirred, a crick in his neck, not sure when he'd finally surrendered to sleep. For a moment he felt weightless, between dream and waking, hope and loss, until the warmth at his side reminded him. Max was there, curled up on the passenger seat, tail beating softly against the worn upholstery. Outside, the world was coming alive. A delivery truck grumbled past the pumps. A distant crow called from somewhere out near the fields, and inside the diner, someone clattered pans, Dave yawned and stretched, blinking away the grit of a long, impossible night. He reached over and laid his hand on Max's shoulder. The dog opened one eye, yawned, and licked Dave's fingers, just as he always had. For a few precious heartbeats, the world felt as right as it ever had. But as the sky brightened, Dave felt something shift. The air seemed to tremble, and Max's form softened in the growing light. Not fading, not quite, but less substantial somehow, as if the dog were made of morning mist. Dave's breath caught. "Hey buddy," he whispered, voice thick, "you stay with me now, just a little longer, okay?" Max whined and sat up, resting his head in Dave's lap. The old dog's eyes were filled with that ancient, knowing calm, the same look he'd given Dave all those years ago beneath the back porch. And again, every time Dave left for the road, in those eyes was comfort and patience and the quiet acceptance of every goodbye. Dave glanced at his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He tried once more to call home. This time his wife answered, voice clearer and cheerer in the morning. "He's still out back," she said when Dave asked, "sleeping like a log. I just checked. He misses you though. When are you coming home?" Dave swallowed hard. He looked at the Max beside him, still warm, still real in the way only things that matter most can be real, and felt a tear slide down his cheek. Soon, he promised, though he wasn't sure who he was promising. He remembered the strange dreams from the night, the fields at sunset, the riverbank, the laughter of old friends, and Max always by his side. He thought of the fleeting shadows that had crossed the lot, the feeling of being watched over by something older and kinder than the world usually allowed. And in that moment, Dave felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He found Max's collar tag, a battered circle of blue metal, and traced the name and number with his thumb. The edges were worn, but the word home was still there, scratched onto the back by one of his daughters long ago. Max licked his hand and nosed the tag, as if remembering. The first rays of sun spilled over the horizon, chasing away the last of the night's chill. Max's fur shimmered in the light, the colors blending into the golden haze. As Dave watched, the old dog rose, stretched, and hopped down from the seat with surprising ease. He gave Dave a long, searching look, then padded quietly to the door. Dave followed, heart pounding, opening the cab and stepping into the cool morning. Max trotted out onto the dew-damp lot, sniffed the air, and turned toward the fence at the edge of the truck stop. For a heartbeat, he looked back, eyes shining, tail high, then slipped through a gap in the posts, vanishing into the tall grass and sunlight beyond. Dave stood there, unable to move or call out, tears wetting his cheeks, every part of him aching with gratitude and goodbye. He looked down at his hand, at the collar tag he still held, and closed his fist around it, holding tight. A few minutes later, as the lot filled with the bustle of a new day, Dave climbed back into his rig. The world felt changed, emptier, but also lighter, as if a great weight had finally lifted from his chest. He tucked the tag onto his key ring, started the engine, and rolled down his window to let in the fresh morning air. He glanced back at the fence, half hoping, half dreading to see Max's shape waiting in the grass. But there was only sunlight, sparkling on the dew, and a gentle breeze that somehow felt like a promise kept. Dave pulled out onto the open road, a peace in his heart he'd never known before. The distance between here and home no longer seemed so impossible. He drove on, the horizon wide and bright, feeling the presence of an old friend, gone perhaps, but never lost, watching over him with every mile. And as the miles rolled by, Dave found himself smiling, whispering a thank you to the wind, and to the road, and to a loyal dog who had found a way to come back, if only for one last ride. The highway stretched endless and black, weaving through the Oklahoma night, and every bump in the asphalt pressed deeper into Henry Graves's bones. He'd been driving since mid-morning, and now it was close to midnight. The truck's dash lights glowed a weary green, illuminating his worn hands on the wheel, and the CB radio was just a hush of static and the distant, ghostly voices of other drivers farther down the line. Rain had been chasing him for miles. Now it drummed softly on the roof, a lullaby he'd learned to hate. Henry's eyelids grew heavy, the world outside his windshield narrowing to a small, bright tunnel, the rest dissolving into shadows. He knew he couldn't push much longer. Exhaustion had a way of playing tricks, and Henry, no stranger to the long haul, knew the danger signs too well. The last thing he needed was to end up jackknifed in a ditch or parked sideways across a lonely stretch of I-40. He pulled off at a rest area, a nameless slab of concrete beside the black ribbon of the interstate, just a few sodium lamps buzzing above cracked picnic tables and empty vending machines. Two other rigs idled at the far end of the lot, lights off, their drivers asleep or hiding from the world behind thick curtains. Henry swung his truck into a space beneath a flickering bulb, killed the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. He let the quiet settle. The hum of the engine faded from his ears, replaced by the slow ticking of metal cooling and the sigh of the wind through half-dead trees. The rain softened, barely more than a mist against the glass. For a moment, Henry allowed himself to forget the weight of the road, the endless ache in his shoulders, the memories that rode with him, silent and heavy as freight. He checked the locks, an old habit, one of many, then crawled through the gap into his sleeper cabin. It was a tight, familiar cave, threadbare curtains, a battered pillow, a sleeping bag zipped halfway open. His few personal things were in their places: the chipped coffee mug, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks, a faded photograph of his late brother smiling by a river. Henry ran his thumb across the image, setting it face down on the little shelf above his head. He toed off his boots, lay back, and listened to the rain. His mind wandered, skimming the surface of sleep, until the world outside the sleeper faded to a distant hum. The memories rose up, the accident years ago, the way his brother used to laugh at nothing, the long stretches of road with no company but a low country song. They always came at night, those memories, circling him in the darkness. Just as he was drifting off, a new sound slid through the hush, a long, slow exhale, soft but unmistakable, breathing, not his own. Henry's eyes snapped open, heart pounding. He held his breath, listening. The truck was still except for the rain and the low whir of the refrigerator. There it was again, a measured inhale, then a sigh, not 3 feet away in the blackness, at the far end of the sleeper. It wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic, it was just there, too close, too human to mistake for wind or the groan of old plastic. He reached for his flashlight and flicked it on, sweeping the pale beam around the tiny space. The light revealed only the cramped corners, the old magazines, the duffel bag, and the shape of his own boots. No movement, no sign of a stowaway, animal or human. Still, Henry's skin prickled as the hair rose on his arms. He sat up, listening hard, waiting for the sound to come again. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the rain, steady and soft. His own breathing grew ragged, louder in the quiet, and he found himself holding it, just to listen better. The breathing started once more, softer, but definitely there, not matching his own, not echo, not trick of the blood in his ears. He shined the light again, heart hammering, checking every crevice, even running his hand under the mattress, behind the tiny fridge, searching for any sign he was not alone. Nothing. Henry tried to laugh it off, telling himself he was just tired, that sleep deprivation could turn the brain inside out. He lay back again, but the sound wouldn't leave. the slow, steady rhythm of another living being in the dark, impossibly close. He squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the edge of the mattress, until his knuckles ached. The road was full of stories, ghosts, lost souls, old drivers who swore they'd shared their sleeper with something unseen. He'd always dismissed them as tricks of fatigue, stories to keep the lonely from feeling so alone. Now, with the rain drumming and that strange breathing filling the cabin, Henry wondered if the stories were true after all. He turned on the cab's dome light, flooding the space with a harsh yellow glare. The sound vanished. He waited, pulse throbbing in his ears, but the only thing left was the hush of the world outside, and the suspicion that he was not, no matter how tightly he locked the doors, alone in the dark. Henry sat perfectly still in the harsh yellow light of the dome, his back pressed against the thin mattress, and every sense stretched tight as wire. The cabin was small, barely enough space for a grown man to sit up straight, but just then it felt cavernous, shadowy corners brimming with things that couldn't be seen. The breathing had stopped the instant he'd flicked the light on, leaving him with only his own ragged exhales and the distant tap of rain against the aluminum skin of the truck. He swept the flashlight across the floor once more, jaw clenched. He checked the little storage hatch above his head, pushed aside the crumpled stack of t-shirts, checked under the shelf where he kept his logbooks and loose change. The space was empty, no stowaway, no animal, nothing but dust and a faint, stubborn smell of motor oil. He grumbled at himself. "You're just tired, Henry. Been too long since you had a night in a real bed." Still, he left the light on, and crawled to the front of the cab, throwing open the passenger door, and stepping into the misty air. It was cold, colder than it should have been in May, and he sucked in a deep breath, trying to clear the cobwebs out of his mind. A quick walk around the rig revealed nothing unusual. The lot was as silent as before, the other two trucks hunched beneath their own islands of light. No movement, no faces in the gloom. The rest area's small building was shuttered for the night, not even a soda machine humming behind the glass. For a moment, Henry was almost grateful for the emptiness. No chance someone could have crept aboard while he wasn't looking. He climbed back inside, locking the door with an extra click. For good measure, he checked the sleeper again, feeling foolish but unable to help himself, satisfied that no one, living anyway, was hiding in the shadows. He clicked off the dome light and let the darkness roll in once more. He settled in, propping his pillow higher and tucking the sleeping bag close around his shoulders. He let out a slow breath, willed his body to relax. The rain was steady again, a whisper on the roof. He closed his eyes and counted each inhale and exhale, waiting for sleep. Then he heard it. The breathing returned, softer this time, almost tentative, as if whoever or whatever it belonged to was trying not to be heard. Henry's eyes flew open. The sound was so close, it made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. Not the wind, not a truck settling, not his own pulse. Steady, human, unmistakable. Henry's heart thudded, a sick twist of dread in his gut. He forced himself to move, flipping the flashlight on and sweeping it through the cabin. Again, nothing. The breathing faded, replaced by silence, so thick it felt like a blanket pressed to his mouth. A wild thought occurred to him. Maybe he'd left something running. He checked the fridge, the heater, the tiny fan clipped to the vent. All were off. He even opened the little closet, pushing his boots aside, shining the light on every cranny. Nothing. Just his own stuff, and the too familiar, musty smell of old travels. Back in the bunk, Henry found himself staring at the shelf where he kept the photograph of his brother. The picture was face down, right where he'd left it, but now a faint, unfamiliar scent drifted in the air. Not oil, not sweat, not the faded tang of his cologne, but something sweeter, a memory half remembered. He picked up the photograph, his thumb brushing the edges. As he sat in the dark, breathing shallow, old memories bubbled up, picking up strangers at lonely truck stops, offering rides to drifters and runaways, hearing stories that never quite left him. But none of them were here now. He was sure he'd checked the cab, locked every door. Still, the feeling of not being alone lingered, strong, persistent, gnawing at his certainty. He tried the radio, flipping it onto a country station, hoping for distraction. Instead, he got nothing but static. The silence of the rest area, pressed in from all sides. He could almost feel the weight of eyes on his back, waiting, watching. Henry's mind spun through every rational explanation he could muster. Exhaustion, low blood sugar, too much caffeine. Maybe he was coming down with something. But deep down he knew, no matter how many times he checked, no matter how brightly he flooded the cab with light, the breathing would be back. He laid down again, gripping the photograph, determined to ride it out. Just a trick of the mind, he told himself. Nothing but nerves and night. But as the rain grew heavier and the dark pressed in, Henry listened, eyes wide open, for the return of that impossible ghostly breath. Henry's mind hovered on the edge of sleep, and waking, thoughts tangled in a haze of memories, half-formed dreams, and the stubborn reality of the cramped sleeper cab. He stared at the ceiling, the photograph of his brother, pressed tight in his hand, the edges growing damp with sweat. The rain had picked up, drumming in steady sheets, masking the world outside, but somehow making the space within the truck feel even smaller. It wasn't just the breathing anymore. As exhaustion dragged him downward, Henry slipped into uneasy dozes, surfacing again and again to faint sounds, whispers, like voices caught on the edge of hearing, and the shifting weight of something behind the curtain that separated the sleeper from the cab. Every time he flicked on the flashlight, there was nothing there, but the air held an uncanny stillness, as if someone or something had just been sitting beside him and left only a second before. He noticed details that didn't belong. The sleeping bag felt warm on one side, as if it had recently held another body. There was a faint indentation on the mattress behind him, subtle but unmistakable. When he reached to smooth it out, the shape of a palm seemed to fit his hand for a split second, before disappearing into the folds of fabric. Worse still was the scent. Not the usual trucker's cocktail of diesel and sweat, but something gentler and sadder, a trace of old perfume, the ghost of pipe smoke. Henry's chest ached with the familiarity of it. He remembered Sunday mornings, as a boy, his mother humming in the kitchen, his brother sneaking a puff behind the barn, the sweet sharp smell lingering for hours. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and tried to shake himself free from the fog. "You're losing it, Graves," he muttered, running a hand over the stubble on his jaw. Just too many hours, too many miles. But the unease wouldn't leave. It was as if the truck itself had become a vessel for memories, for every sorrow and guilt Henry carried up and down the highways. At some point, he nodded off, the photograph still clutched to his chest. This time, the dreams were vivid. He stood on the side of the road in a heavy fog, a figure approaching from the distance. He called out, but the figure didn't answer. Instead, it stopped a few feet away. Henry recognized the outline, the slouch of his brother's shoulders, the way he tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. The figure looked up, but where a face should have been, there was only darkness, and the sound of slow, steady breathing. Henry jerked awake with a gasp, heart rattling in his chest. The photograph slipped from his hand, tumbling to the floor. The breathing was there again, unmistakable, so close it seemed to stir the hair on the back of his neck. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk, hands shaking, and stared into the gloom at the far end of the sleeper. He reached out blindly, feeling along the wall, half expecting his hand to brush against cold skin. He flicked the dome light on, flooding the space with a hard yellow glare. Once again, nothing. The mattress was smooth, the corners empty, the only movement his own frantic reflection in the scratched window. But now, Lying on the narrow shelf above his pillow was the photograph he just dropped. It was flipped face up, as if someone or something wanted him to see it again. He climbed back inside, locking the door with an extra click. For good measure, he checked the sleeper again, feeling foolish but unable to help himself. Satisfied that no one living, anyway, was hiding in the shadows, he clicked off the dome light and let the darkness roll in once more. He settled in, propping his pillow higher and tucking the sleeping bag close around his shoulders. He let out a slow breath, willed his body to relax. The rain was steady again, a whisper on the roof. He closed his eyes and counted each inhale and exhale, waiting for sleep. Then he heard it. The breathing returned, softer this time, almost tentative, as if whoever or whatever it belonged to was trying not to be heard. Henry's eyes flew open. The sound was so close, it made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. Not the wind, not a truck settling, not his own pulse. Steady, human, unmistakable. Henry's heart thudded, a sick twist of dread in his gut. He forced himself to move, flipping the flashlight on and sweeping it through the cabin. Again, nothing. The breathing faded, replaced by silence so thick it felt like a blanket pressed to his mouth. A wild thought occurred to him. Maybe he'd left something running. He checked the fridge, the heater, the tiny fan clipped to the vent. All were off. He even opened the little closet, pushing his boots aside, shining the light on every cranny. Nothing. Just his own stuff, and the too familiar, musty smell of old travels. Back in the bunk, Henry found himself staring at the shelf where he kept the photograph of his brother. The picture was face down, right where he'd left it, but now a faint, unfamiliar scent drifted in the air. Not oil, not sweat, not the faded tang of his cologne, but something sweeter, a memory half remembered. He picked up the photograph, his thumb brushing the edges. As he sat in the dark, breathing shallow, old memories bubbled up, picking up strangers at lonely truck stops, offering rides to drifters and runaways, hearing stories that never quite left him. But none of them were here now. He was sure he'd checked the cab, locked every door. Still, the feeling of not being alone lingered, strong, persistent, gnawing at his certainty. He tried the radio, flipping it onto a country station, hoping for distraction. Instead, he got nothing but static. The silence of the rest area pressed in from all sides. He could almost feel the weight of eyes on his back, waiting, watching. Henry's mind spun through every rational explanation he could muster. Exhaustion, low blood sugar, too much caffeine. Maybe he was coming down with something, but deep down he knew, no matter how many times he checked, no matter how brightly he flooded the cab with light, the breathing would be back. He laid down again, gripping the photograph, determined to ride it out. Just a trick of the mind, he told himself. Nothing but nerves and night. But as the rain grew heavier and the dark pressed in, Henry listened, eyes wide open, for the return of that impossible ghostly breath. Henry's mind hovered on the edge of sleep and waking, thoughts tangled in a haze of memories, half-formed dreams, and the stubborn reality of the cramped sleeper cab. He stared at the ceiling, the photograph of his brother pressed tight in his hand, the edges growing damp with sweat. The rain had picked up, drumming in steady sheets, masking the world outside, but somehow making the space within the truck feel even smaller. It wasn't just the breathing anymore. As exhaustion dragged him downward, Henry slipped into uneasy dozes, surfacing again and again to faint sounds, whispers, like voices caught on the edge of hearing, and the shifting weight of something behind the curtain that separated the sleeper from the cab. Every time he flicked on the flashlight, there was nothing there, but the air held an uncanny stillness, as if someone or something had just been sitting beside him and left only a second before. He noticed details that didn't belong. The sleeping bag felt warm on one side, as if it had recently held another body. There was a faint indentation on the mattress behind him, subtle but unmistakable. When he reached to smooth it out, the shape of a palm seemed to fit his hand for a split second before disappearing into the folds of fabric. Worse still was the scent, not the usual trucker's cocktail of diesel and sweat, but something gentler and sadder, a trace of old perfume, the ghost of pipe smoke. Henry's chest ached with the familiarity of it. He remembered Sunday mornings as a boy, his mother humming in the kitchen, his brother sneaking a puff behind the barn, the sweet sharp smell lingering for hours. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and tried to shake himself free from the fog. "You're losing it, Graves," he muttered, running a hand over the stubble on his jaw. "Just too many hours, too many miles." But the unease wouldn't leave. It was as if the truck itself had become a vessel for memories, for every sorrow and guilt Henry carried up and down the highways. At some point, he nodded off, the photograph still clutched to his chest. This time, the dreams were vivid. He stood on the side of the road in a heavy fog, a figure approaching from the distance. He called out, but the figure didn't answer. Instead, it stopped a few feet away. Henry recognized the outline, the slouch of his brother's shoulders, the way he tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. The figure looked up, but where a face should have been, there was only darkness, and the sound of slow, steady breathing. Henry jerked awake with a gasp, heart rattling in his chest. The photograph slipped from his hand, tumbling to the floor. The breathing was there again, unmistakable, so close it seemed to stir the hair on the back of his neck. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk, hands shaking, and stared into the gloom, at the far end of the sleeper. He reached out blindly, feeling along the wall, half expecting his hand to brush against cold skin. He flicked the dome light on, flooding the space with a hard yellow glare. Once again, nothing. The mattress was smooth, the corners empty, the only movement, his own frantic reflection in the scratched window. But now, lying on the narrow shelf above his pillow, was the photograph he'd just dropped. It was flipped face up, as if someone or something wanted him to see it again.
The truck felt different too. The air inside was lighter, the faint sense of perfume and pipe smoke replaced by the clean promise of a new day. The oppressive cold was gone. In its place was a gentle warmth from the morning sun, just beginning to climb the horizon. Henry slid out of the sleeper, feet touching the cool floor. He stretched, feeling every ache and old injury, but none of them seemed to matter so much anymore. He pulled the curtains back, letting light fill the cab, and sat for a moment looking out across the empty lot. The other rigs were waking up, engines coughing to life, headlights flickering on as drivers readied for another long haul. He glanced around the cabin, searching for any other sign that the night had been more than just a fever dream. On the shelf where he kept the photograph, he found a small object he didn't remember leaving there, his brother's old lighter, battered and tarnished, initials scratched into the metal. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand, thumb running over the grooves. He flicked it open just once and watched the little flame spark, steady and golden. It felt like a sign. Henry smiled, the kind of soft private smile he hadn't worn in years. He slipped the lighter into his pocket, tucked the photograph safely into his wallet, and took a long, steadying breath. The world outside the truck was waking up, but Henry lingered, wanting to hold on to the hush for just a moment longer. He remembered what he'd felt in the night, that sense of his brother's forgiveness, the relief that came from finally facing the past instead of outrunning it. The haunting had been more than fear and sorrow. It was a reminder, a message. It's all right to let go. It's all right to keep living. He started the engine. The familiar rumble filled the cab, grounding him. Henry rolled down his window, letting in air that smelled of rain and promise. He was tired, bone-tired, but the fatigue was easier to bear. The dread that had gnawed at him on the road had loosened its grip. As he pulled out of the rest stop, Henry glanced into his mirrors, half expecting to see a shape in the back window, a last glimpse of his brother, a wave, a smile. But there was only empty glass, the sky growing brighter, the road stretching wide and open. A sense of peace settled over him as the miles began to unspool. The landscape rolled by, gold and green and blue, and for the first time in a long time, Henry felt ready to meet whatever waited down the line. He whispered a soft goodbye to the cab, to the shadows, to the sorrow that had ridden with him for too many miles. In the side mirror, as he merged onto the highway, Henry thought he saw a brief flicker, a flash of a familiar smile, gone before he could be sure. He smiled back anyway. The past was still there, as all pasts are, but it no longer held him fast. He drove on beneath the brightening sky, lighter by the weight of a single ragged breath, free at last to carry his memories with love, not regret, into the long, unending road ahead.
The highway stretched endless and black, weaving through the Oklahoma night, and every bump in the asphalt pressed deeper into Henry Graves's bones. He'd been driving since mid-morning, and now it was close to midnight. The truck's dash lights glowed a weary green, illuminating his worn hands on the wheel, and the CB radio was just a hush of static and the distant, ghostly voices of other drivers farther down the line. Rain had been chasing him for miles. Now it drummed softly on the roof, a lullaby he'd learned to hate. Henry's eyelids grew heavy, the world outside his windshield narrowing to a small, bright tunnel, the rest dissolving into shadows. He knew he couldn't push much longer. Exhaustion had a way of playing tricks, and Henry, no stranger to the long haul, knew the danger signs too well. The last thing he needed was to end up jackknifed in a ditch or parked sideways across a lonely stretch of I-40. He pulled off at a rest area, a nameless slab of concrete beside the black ribbon of the interstate, just a few sodium lamps buzzing above cracked picnic tables and empty vending machines. Two other rigs idled at the far end of the lot, lights off, their drivers asleep or hiding from the world behind thick curtains. Henry swung his truck into a space beneath a flickering bulb, killed the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. He let the quiet settle. The hum of the engine faded from his ears, replaced by the slow ticking of metal cooling and the sigh of the wind through half-dead trees. The rain softened, barely more than a mist against the glass. For a moment, Henry allowed himself to forget the weight of the road, the endless ache in his shoulders, the memories that rode with him, silent and heavy as freight. He checked the locks, an old habit, one of many, then crawled through the gap into his sleeper cabin. It was a tight, familiar cave, threadbare curtains, a battered pillow, a sleeping bag zipped halfway open. His few personal things were in their places: the chipped coffee mug, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks, a faded photograph of his late brother smiling by a river. Henry ran his thumb across the image, setting it face down on the little shelf above his head. He toed off his boots, lay back, and listened to the rain. His mind wandered, skimming the surface of sleep, until the world outside the sleeper faded to a distant hum. The memories rose up, the accident years ago, the way his brother used to laugh at nothing, the long stretches of road with no company but a low country song. They always came at night, those memories, circling him in the darkness. Just as he was drifting off, a new sound slid through the hush, a long, slow exhale, soft but unmistakable, breathing, not his own. Henry's eyes snapped open, heart pounding. He held his breath, listening. The truck was still except for the rain and the low whir of the refrigerator. There it was again, a measured inhale, then a sigh, not 3 feet away in the blackness, at the far end of the sleeper. It wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic, it was just there, too close, too human to mistake for wind or the groan of old plastic. He reached for his flashlight and flicked it on, sweeping the pale beam around the tiny space. The light revealed only the cramped corners, the old magazines, the duffel bag, and the shape of his own boots. No movement, no sign of a stowaway, animal or human. Still, Henry's skin prickled as the hair rose on his arms. He sat up, listening hard, waiting for the sound to come again. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the rain, steady and soft. His own breathing grew ragged, louder in the quiet, and he found himself holding it, just to listen better. The breathing started once more, softer, but definitely there, not matching his own, not echo, not trick of the blood in his ears. He shined the light again, heart hammering, checking every crevice, even running his hand under the mattress, behind the tiny fridge, searching for any sign he was not alone. Nothing. Henry tried to laugh it off, telling himself he was just tired, that sleep deprivation could turn the brain inside out. He lay back again, but the sound wouldn't leave, the slow, steady rhythm of another living being in the dark, impossibly close. He squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the edge of the mattress, until his knuckles ached. The road was full of stories, ghosts, lost souls, old drivers who swore they'd shared their sleeper with something unseen. He'd always dismissed them as tricks of fatigue, stories to keep the lonely from feeling so alone. Now, with the rain drumming and that strange breathing filling the cabin, Henry wondered if the stories were true after all. He turned on the cab's dome light, flooding the space with a harsh yellow glare. The sound vanished. He waited, pulse throbbing in his ears, but the only thing left was the hush of the world outside, and the suspicion that he was not, no matter how tightly he locked the doors, alone in the dark. Henry sat perfectly still in the harsh yellow light of the dome, his back pressed against the thin mattress, and every sense stretched tight as wire. The cabin was small, barely enough space for a grown man to sit up straight, but just then it felt cavernous, shadowy corners brimming with things that couldn't be seen. The breathing had stopped the instant he'd flicked the light on, leaving him with only his own ragged exhales and the distant tap of rain against the aluminum skin of the truck. He swept the flashlight across the floor once more, jaw clenched. He checked the little storage hatch above his head, pushed aside the crumpled stack of t-shirts, checked under the shelf, where he kept his logbooks and loose change. The space was empty, no stowaway, no animal, nothing but dust and a faint, stubborn smell of motor oil. He grumbled at himself. "You're just tired, Henry. Been too long since you had a night in a real bed." Still, he left the light on, and crawled to the front of the cab, throwing open the passenger door, and stepping into the misty air. It was cold, colder than it should have been in May, and he sucked in a deep breath, trying to clear the cobwebs out of his mind. A quick walk around the rig revealed nothing unusual. The lot was as silent as before, the other two trucks hunched beneath their own islands of light. No movement, no faces in the gloom. The rest area's small building was shuttered for the night, not even a soda machine humming behind the glass. For a moment, Henry was almost grateful for the emptiness. No chance someone could have crept aboard while he wasn't looking. He caught himself muttering a nervous prayer. Just get me through. Just a few more miles. He passed marker 117. The wind howled, and the snow seemed to grow thicker, choking off what little visibility remained. Then, as if from nowhere, an old sedan appeared on the right shoulder, half buried in snow, its shape more a memory than a reality. The headlights were dark, the glass frosted. Ed's breath hitched. There was something strange about the car, its grille and lines straight out of another era, like the battered Chevrolets his father used to drive. He caught a flash of a license plate, the numbers rimmed with frost, but couldn't make them out before the blizzard swept it from view. The landscape around him grew unfamiliar, even though he'd driven this highway more times than he could count. To where the prairie should have rolled flat, now stood old barbed wire fences, twisted and broken, and a narrow bridge with wooden guardrails slick with ice. The truck's tires began to shudder on the drifted snow. Ed's pulse hammered. He considered stopping, but the shoulder was a mess of white and darkness, impossible to judge. Then the CB sputtered, static shifted, and for a moment, he heard a voice, hollow and far away. "If anyone can hear me, this is Cal Dorsey, westbound, stuck just past the old trestle, engines gone, Can't see the road. Please, anybody. The transmission cut out, swallowed by the blizzard's scream. Ed's hands trembled on the wheel. Cal Dorsey, he knew the name. An old-timer, gone since the 1980s. The story was legend. Lost in a blizzard, never found. His rig discovered months later, in a snow-filled drawer, with the doors locked, and a radio still hissing inside. A chill crawled up Ed's neck. No way, he whispered, breath fogging the cab. No way. He wanted to turn around, but the road behind was invisible. He felt like he'd driven, not just out of his time zone, but out of time itself. More landmarks loomed. A collapsed windmill, half swallowed by a drift, a sign for a town he'd never heard of. Letters scoured nearly blank by snow and years. The rig's dashboard flickered, radio crackling. The storm howled louder, and Ed felt something shift in his gut, a cold certainty he couldn't explain. He kept driving, headlights barely piercing the thick air. Sometimes, just at the edge of vision, he saw shadowy figures moving along the road, shapes wrapped in coats and scarves, heads bowed against the storm, vanishing when he tried to focus. He pressed on, breath shallow, wondering if he was seeing ghosts, or just the tricks of snow and tired eyes. The storm pressed closer, filling the cab with an electric hush. Ed gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to panic. He thought of the warning. Don't go past mile marker 117 tonight. The truck was his only lifeline, but with every passing second, it felt like a ship lost at sea. The snow thickened again, world shrinking to the glow of his own headlights. Ed whispered, just a few more miles, clinging to hope, as the highway twisted into a nightmare that no one else, it seemed, would ever believe. Ed's world shrank to the walled glow of his headlights, the outside storm pressing hard against the glass. The heater strained, breath fogging the inside of the cab, while snow kept piling on the hood, so thick he could almost hear it. His nerves jangled with every mile. The dasher's clock still stuck on midnight, the temperature display blinking and sputtering between numbers, sometimes reading. It felt less like a night drive, and more like being adrift in a sealed capsule, somehow unmoored from the familiar logic of road and season. Somewhere past the half-faded sign for creek crossing, Pop 211, the snow began to shift. Instead of falling straight, it spun in odd, looping eddies, like something alive, circling the truck. The world beyond the headlights was an endless churning gray, save for the occasional flash, old barbed wire, a fence post split by years of storms, or the sudden dark blur of a tree that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ed slowed to barely 10 miles an hour, gripping the wheel so hard his wrists ached. That's when he noticed the tire tracks. In the beam of his headlights, a set of fresh wide tracks curved onto the highway, snaking forward into the blizzard. Chains had bitten into the snow, old-school heavy links that left a clear pattern. Ed frowned. He'd seen no lights ahead, no taillights since the snow began, but now and then, the chain tracks flickered in the snow drifts, as if another rig was just ahead, moving at the same slow crawl. He leaned over the wheel, squinting for any sign of another driver. A flash of red lights, a reflective patch on a trailer. Nothing, just the ghostly suggestion of movement on the edge of sight, the way a story might slip past your mind, just before waking. A few times, he glimpsed shadowy figures by the side of the road, shapes hunched against the cold, their outlines more like smudges in the storm than people. Each time, his heart jerked and he thought to honk, to signal, but they vanished, dissolving into the swirling snow before he could even reach for the horn. The radio suddenly clicked on, a pulse of static erupting from the speakers. For a moment, Ed heard music, a few bars of an old hymn, wavery and off-key, then a woman's voice, tinny and sad. If anyone can hear me, we're still out here. We're so cold, tell my boy. I tried. The transmission fractured, garbled by static. It repeated, word for word, then faded to silence. Ed stared at the radio, chills racing down his spine. He switched the CB off, then on again, but it was dead, just a low, rising whine, like wind howling through a canyon. His mind spun with memory and fear. He'd heard truck stop stories of this stretch, a winter pileup back in '76. The whole highway closed for days. Folks said you could still hear the lost calls for help on some nights, but Ed had always dismissed it as legend. Now, with every bump of the chains in the snow, every flicker of the ghostly taillights ahead, he wondered if he'd somehow slipped into a place where stories bled into reality. The tracks grew deeper, twisting toward a narrow bridge, an ancient span of wood and iron, slick with ice. It shouldn't have been here. The real bridge on I-80 had been replaced with a modern concrete span years before, but Ed's headlights caught the battered rails, and the silhouette of a single figure standing at the center, hand raised as if to warn him back.
He braked hard, the rig shuddering, ABS chattering. The figure remained, a shadow in the snow, no details, just the shape of a man in an old canvas coat, scarf blowing out behind. Ed's heart hammered. He felt the urge to open the window to yell, but the storm screamed louder than any voice. Suddenly, the tire tracks ahead vanished, swallowed by the drifting snow. The figure on the bridge lowered its arm, then disappeared in the blizzard. The road beyond looked impossibly deep, like a river of white with no banks. Ed stared, breath tight, panic clawing at his throat. He glanced in the mirror, expecting to see his own taillights, maybe even the shadowy figures from the road behind. Instead, the world behind was blank. No tracks, no headlights, just swirling snow, as if he were the only soul left on earth. For a moment, he thought of stopping, waiting for the dawn, but something, fear or stubbornness, made him shift the rig into low gear. Inching forward toward the bridge, the hymn from the radio echoed in his mind, haunting and sweet. Every inch felt like moving deeper into a dream, or a memory not his own. The blizzard pressed in, the world narrowing to the glow of the dash and the silent company of the storm. And ahead, barely visible through the white, a faint red glow appeared, taillights, or the last embers of another driver's hope, beckoning Ed onward through the night. The bridge loomed up out of the blizzard, wooden planks shrouded in a rime of ice, iron rails glazed with frost, the whole thing stretching over a river that was little more than a frozen ditch in the storm. Ed's rig groaned as he eased onto it, each tire sending a groan through the frame, the snow muffling everything except the tremble of the wood beneath his wheels. The taillights he'd glimpsed ahead pulsed through the whiteness, two dull red eyes, flickering and unreal. He reached the middle of the bridge and stopped. The road ahead was gone, erased by the storm, just a wall of swirling white that seemed to spin and deepen the longer he stared. The taillights had vanished. The bridge felt suddenly ancient, as if he'd driven onto a piece of road abandoned by time. The wind rattled the rails, carrying with it the echo of voices, some laughing, some crying, a chorus woven with the howl of winter. Ed leaned forward, squinting, and saw a shape walking the far side of the bridge, a man in a parka, head bowed, plowing through drifts that came to his knees. For a wild moment, Ed thought he recognized him. Same build, same walk. It looked almost like himself. He blinked hard, the apparition gone. As quickly as it came, something banged against the side of the trailer, making Ed jump. He flicked on the dome light, heart thumping, and listened. Nothing, only the rush of the wind and the steady thump of his own pulse. He gripped the wheel, trying to decide whether to move forward or try to back up, but the idea of reversing across the ice-slicked planks chilled him more than the storm. A sudden weight settled in the cab,
heavy as memory. The voices outside grew clearer, individual words lost, but full of longing, regret, hope, and warnings, wrapped in the whirling snow. Then above the rest, one voice broke through, crisp and pleading. "Don't go, Ed, not tonight." It sounded so close, so heartbreakingly familiar, that he almost wept. The dash lights flickered, the radio clicked on by itself, static, then a repeat of the old distress call. "Cal Dorsey, westbound, stuck just past the old trestle, can't see the road, please anybody." It faded, looping, a broken message on repeat. Ed shuddered, remembering Cal's story, lost forever, last heard on the CB, in a storm. Just like this, a numb terror gripped him. He turned off the ignition, the engine's rumble dying, and the silence that rushed in was so deep it hurt. He wrapped his jacket tighter and, after a long moment, cracked the door and stepped out. The wind nearly took him off his feet. Snow swirled into every seam and crease, freezing his skin in an instant. He shielded his eyes and staggered a few steps, boots crunching on ice and wood. The air was alive with movement, shapes drifting along the edge of vision. Drivers in old coats, a woman with a lantern, a child clutching a doll. They seemed to watch him, neither friendly nor menacing, just waiting. A shape materialized in front of him, close, solid, blocking the way ahead. It was the man from the bridge. Ed's own face stared back at him, hollow-eyed, streaked with ice, lips moving in soundless warning. Ed staggered, heart hammering. He tried to speak, but the wind tore the words away. The other Ed reached out, hand cold as stone, and gripped his arm. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice soft but carrying over the storm. "You can turn back. Not every road goes forward." The faces of the lost flickered all around. Some he thought he recognized, some strangers, their eyes sad, hopeful, pleading. For a second, Ed's whole life seemed to narrow to this choice: drive on into oblivion, or turn back toward the world of the living. He nodded, fighting tears, and the figure smiled, gentle, understanding, almost grateful. "Find the lights," he said. "You're not done yet." Ed stumbled back to the truck, every breath searing his lungs. He climbed in, hands numb, and fumbled the keys. The dash flared to life, the engine roaring back, headlights slicing through the white. Ahead, for the first time, he saw a set of taillights glowing through the storm, steady and bright, leading away from the bridge. He followed, crawling forward, until the planks gave way to the hard snow-packed road. The storm still howled, but the figures had vanished, the bridge behind swallowed up in the spinning white. Ed locked onto the lights ahead, his guide, his hope, and pressed on, each mile pulling him further from the brink, back towards something like dawn. Ed clung to the wheel as the truck rumbled off the ancient bridge, the taillights ahead, glowing steady and red, unwavering through the storm. They led him at a crawl, never drifting out of sight, always just far enough ahead to promise escape. He followed, headlights tunneling through the blizzard, every muscle wound tight, afraid that if he blinked, he'd lose his way again, or lose himself to the snow entirely.
The world was still white and whirling, but as Ed pressed on, something in the storm began to change. The wind lost its howl, softening to a restless whisper. The snowflakes grew smaller, their frantic spinning easing to a gentle drift. With every mile, the oppressive cold inside the cab began to fade, chased back by the slow warmth of the engine and the steadiness of his own breathing. The dashboard clock flickered, 12:17, then 3:06, then finally ticked to 4:01, as if a spell had lifted. Suddenly, the tail lights ahead winked out. Ed blinked, heart leaping. He pumped the brakes, squinting through the windshield, and nearly wept with relief. The snow was gone. Just like that, the world outside was a clear Wyoming night, the sky luminous and blue-black, stars glittering overhead, not a flake or drift anywhere in sight. The temperature on the dash
read 43 degrees. There was no evidence of a blizzard, no snow on the shoulders, only the dark ribbon of I-80 stretching ahead, bone dry beneath his tires. He pulled over, shaking, needing a minute to believe it. He climbed out, boots landing on bare gravel. The air was sharp and clean, and the only sounds were the hum of distant traffic and a meadowlark's call from somewhere in the sagebrush. Ed looked back down the highway. There was no bridge behind him, just the gently sloping prairie, as if the old wooden span and its ghosts had never existed. His hands still trembled as he walked around the rig. There was no snow on the trailer, no frost on the windows. The only sign something had happened was a single, faint handprint on the passenger door, small and delicate, as if a child or a woman had touched it. The print shimmered with a fine dusting of frost, then faded under his breath, vanishing into the sunrise. He climbed back into the cab, stunned. The radio crackled to life, music and voices flooding the silence. CB chatter returned, drivers griping about construction delays and the endless wind, no one mentioning any storm. Ed keyed the mic, voice hoarse, "Big Red here. Anyone catch that squall back by mile marker 117? Negative, Big Red," came the easy reply. "Clear all night, nary a cloud in sight. You on the right channel." Ed forced a chuckle. Maybe I'm just seeing things. He put the truck in gear, but as he did, something on the seat caught his eye, a small silver locket, its surface frosted and cold to the touch. He turned it over. The initials CD were etched on the back. Ed snapped it open and found a faded photograph. Inside, a smiling woman and a little girl, their winter coats buttoned tight. He remembered the voice from the radio, the legend of Cal Dorsey and his last call for help. He cradled the locket for a long moment, then tucked it safely into the pocket of his shirt. The storm, the ghosts, the bridge, they might be gone, but something of them remained. Not just a warning, not just a haunting, but a reminder of how thin the line could be between the living and the lost. With the sun rising and the horizon washed in gold, Ed drove on, changed in a way he couldn't quite name. He felt humbled, grateful, and a little awed by the strangeness and the mercy of the road. He knew he'd carry the memory of that storm forever, its chill, its voices, the strange guidance of those impossible taillights. And as the miles unspooled beneath him, Ed found himself listening to the CB with new ears, listening for warnings and voices out of time, and for that flicker of the extraordinary that sometimes, on lonely roads, called you to remember you were never really alone. Lonnie Weaver had hauled every kind of freight in his 20-year run, from produce to power tools, from fireworks to fragile antiques. He was a man who took pride in knowing his rig and his load inside out, the sort who double-checked a latch and triple-checked a manifest before putting a single mile behind him. That's why, on that chilly Tuesday night, something about this run made him itch with a vague, restless unease. He arrived at the Northport distribution yard just before closing, last scheduled pickup before midnight. The security lights were blinding as he pulled up, bleaching the yard into a world of stark black and white. Two workers in orange vests flagged him in, their faces drawn tight, voices low and hurried as they guided his trailer up to Bay 7. The forklift driver barely made eye contact, keeping his head down as the cargo was loaded. Pallets of electronics, Lonnie was told, shrink-wrapped and locked down. High value, the shipping manager said, holding out a clipboard with trembling hands. Lonnie read the paperwork over twice. The manifest looked fine, but the sign-off box at the bottom was left blank. "You forgot a signature," he said, tapping the empty space. The manager hesitated. "Warehouse's new guy, paperwork'll catch up. Don't worry." He reached for the clipboard, but Lonnie held on, brow furrowed. "I don't haul a load unless it's all square," Lonnie insisted. With a quick, nervous scribble, the manager scrawled something resembling initials. He wouldn't meet Lonnie's eyes. "Sorry, it's been a hell of a day." Lonnie walked the perimeter of his trailer, flashlight in hand. The back doors were open as the last pallet slid in. He scanned the interior, just boxes stacked 4 high, a faint scent of cold plastic and wood, nothing moving, nothing out of place. He watched as the forklift driver shut the doors and slid the locking bar into place. Lonnie checked the lock, yanked on it twice. Solid. He looped the heavy steel seal through the latch and clicked it shut, then noted the number, a 204176, in his logbook, the way he always did. He even snapped a photo with his phone. Routine, muscle memory. When he turned back, the 2 workers had already vanished into the main building, lights flickering out behind them. The yard felt colder, the wind biting through his jacket. He climbed into the cab, tossing the paperwork on the passenger seat. Lonnie started the engine, letting the old Freightliner settle into a familiar, comforting rumble. As he rolled for the gate, he couldn't shake the sense of being hurried along, as if everyone wanted this load gone and out of sight. The guard at the exit barely glanced at his manifest before waving him through, shivering in his booth and keeping one hand pressed to his radio. The city dropped away behind him, replaced by empty highway and the pulse of white center lines. Lonnie queued up the CB and found nothing but silence. He thumbed through channels, but no one was talking. Most truckers were either home by now or running the big arteries out of state. It was supposed to be a straight shot, Northport to a warehouse just outside Muncie, Indiana. About 400 miles of flat Midwest, all interstate, no detours. But Lonnie's skin prickled as he drove. He kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to see someone following him out of the yard. The first 2 hours passed with nothing but the drone of tires and the low static crackle of the CB. He tried to chalk up the feeling to too much coffee and too little sleep. But a couple miles past the county line, a faint thud came from the trailer, soft but definite. Not the usual shift of cargo, not the rattle of a loose strap. Lonnie's fingers tightened on the wheel. He slowed, eyeing the shoulder. "Just the wind," he muttered, but the air was dead calm. Another sound followed, a scrape, like something dragging across plywood. At the first rest stop, Lonnie pulled off, hazard lights flashing. He grabbed his flashlight and walked the length of the trailer, hand running over the steel skin, listening. The lock and seal were untouched, just as he'd left them. He shone the beam through the tiny inspection slot, boxes wrapped and still, stacked exactly as before. Not a thing had moved. He lingered for a moment, waiting for another sound, but the lot was silent. Only the faint chirp of insects and the distant hum of a semi idling down by the fuel pumps. Lonnie jotted a note in his logbook. Strange noise, 1:08 a.m. Checked, nothing. He almost laughed at himself, but the unease remained. Back in the cab, the highway seemed darker. The only other car was a state trooper in the far lane, headlights receding into the night. Lonnie glanced again in his mirror. The trailer's back doors, visible in the glow of his marker lights, looked ordinary enough. Still, he felt the weight of something in the dark behind them, something waiting, silent, riding with him down the empty miles. He rolled on, knuckles white on the wheel, the sense of routine giving way to a slow, growing dread he couldn't explain. By the time the next rest stop appeared, Lonnie knew sleep would have to wait. Tonight, he would be keeping one eye on the mirrors, and the other on the locked silent trailer behind him. The highway was empty, but Lonnie never felt so watched. Every time he checked the mirror, the dark rectangle of the trailer's doors seemed to look back at him, blank and mute, but full of hidden promise. The CB radio spat only static, the silence so deep that even the low growl of the engine felt too loud. Midwest night pressed hard on the cab, broken only by the glow of dashboard lights and an occasional pair of oncoming headlights flashing by. Half an hour past the last rest stop, the noises returned, soft at first, like shifting cargo, then sharper. There was a scraping, the faintest clatter, and once, Lonnie thought he heard a thud, as if a box had toppled, or something much heavier had leaned against the trailer wall. He checked the GPS, still miles from the next town, nothing but flat black road, and the endless sweep of farmland all around. He turned up the radio, trying to drown out his nerves with oldies, but the sound fizzled out, as if the air itself was refusing music. Then through the static, something strange, a low whispery hiss that almost sounded like his name.
He snapped the volume off. "Just tired," he muttered, running his thumb over the steering wheel, but his heart hammered faster. He gripped the wheel with both hands, forcing his attention on the straight stretch ahead. The air inside the cab grew cold, and for a moment he was sure he could see his own breath puff in front of his lips. He pulled into a well-lit truck stop on the outskirts of a small town, trying to shake the feeling of eyes on his neck. He parked as close as he could to the building, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped into the night. It was too quiet for midnight. No laughter from the diner, no engines idling, just the click of cooling metal and the distant hum of a vending machine. Lonnie walked to the back of the trailer. The lock and the steel security seal were untouched, the number unchanged. He ran his hand along the cold metal, pressing his ear to the door, straining to hear any sound from within. For a long moment, nothing. Then, as he started to step away, he heard it again, a faint scratching, rhythmic, almost as if someone was slowly dragging a nail along the inside wall. He yanked his head back, heart thudding, and circled the rig, checking every door and latch, every possible entry point, all secure. He even got down on one knee, peering beneath the trailer. Nothing but gravel and his own wild reflection in a puddle of rainwater. A sudden clatter made him jump. He spun, shining his light into the shadows between rigs, but there was nothing there, just the echo of his own movement and a lone semi rolling by, out on the highway. Lonnie swallowed, nerves raw, and forced himself to walk back to the cab. Inside, the CB fizzed to life for half a second, a burst of static, and then a sound like breathing. "Breaker 19, he called, but no one answered. Just that long, empty hush, as if the highway itself was holding its breath. Lonnie sat still, knuckles white, considering his options. He could call dispatch, but what would he say? "I think my trailer's haunted," he'd be laughed off the run. He checked the clock, nearly 2 a.m. He told himself to quit being foolish, to finish the route, to get this delivery behind him, and sleep it off. He put the rig in gear, pulling back onto the empty interstate. The moon rose pale over the fields, making everything silver and strange. The noises from the trailer faded for a while, replaced by a creeping sense of something waiting, something patient. A few miles out, the trailer lights flickered in the mirrors. Lonnie tapped the dashboard, hoping it was a wiring issue, but the flickering stopped on its own. A gust of cold air slipped through the vents, brushing the hair on his arms. He turned up the heat, but the chill clung to the cab. Then, just before the last turnoff before Muncie, the noises flared up, thudding, scraping, a sharp crack like a box splitting open. The CB radio came to life, but instead of static, he heard something unmistakable, a whisper, so soft he almost missed it. "Lonnie," he slammed on the brakes, pulling hard onto the shoulder, pulse pounding. He jumped out and ran to the back,
breath steaming in the chill. The seal and lock were still secure, unbroken. He pressed his ear to the door. This time, all was silent. For a long time, he stood there, under the indifferent stars, listening for anything that might make sense. But only the wind moved, sighing across the empty road. He checked his phone. No EQ1U messages, no signal. He felt utterly alone, a man with a job to do, and a trailer full of darkness behind him. Lonnie walked back to the cab, locked the doors, and rested his head on the wheel. He was too old to believe in ghosts, too tired not to fear them. He started the engine, and drove on, the road unspooling into the night. The trailer behind him locked tight, and whatever was inside, locked in with it. The lights of the delivery yard glared through the last shreds of fog, as Lonnie eased his rig up to dock 3, shoulders tense with exhaustion. The sky was going faintly blue at the edges. He'd driven straight through the heart of the night, every nerve set jangling by those phantom sounds behind the trailer walls. As the cab settled into idle, he let out a long shaky breath and rubbed his hands, trying to shake off the chill that hadn't left him since Indiana. 2 warehouse workers, both yawning and bundled in flannel, met him at the dock with clipboards in hand. Lonnie forced a smile, handed over his manifest, and climbed down to supervise the unload. Habit and a bit of pride kept him involved with every delivery. But before the workers even reached the doors, Lonnie heard one mutter, "Seals look good, number matches." The other fumbled with the lock, then paused, frowning. "Hey boss, this isn't right." Lonnie stepped closer. "What's wrong?" "Bar's not moving," the worker grunted. He rattled the handle, then tried again with both hands. The locking bar, heavy steel, and usually stubborn from road dust, refused to budge. "Feels like it's stuck from the inside." The phrase hung in the air, cold and impossible. Lonnie's mouth went dry. "That can't be. I sealed it myself at Northport, saw it locked, even checked at every stop." The workers exchanged a look. The older one banged on the doors, hard. "Hey, anyone back there?" Silence. The younger crouched, eyeing the gap at the bottom of the doors. "Can't see a thing," he muttered, trying to peer through, but he trailed off, brow knitting. "It's weird. Looks like, I dunno, something's moving in there." Lonnie felt a cold trickle down his back. "I'm telling you, it's just cargo. It's just boxes." The dock supervisor joined them, keys jangling on his belt. "We'll get it open. Don't want to keep the next guy waiting." He radioed for maintenance. Within minutes, a pair of men in heavy gloves arrived with crowbars and a sledge. As they worked, Lonnie pressed his ear to the steel. He expected silence, maybe the slide of a pallet, or the shuffle of cardboard. Instead he heard it, the soft, almost gentle scrape that had haunted him all night, like fingers brushing wood. The sound made the hair on his neck prickle. A loud crack echoed as the maintenance team finally pried the locking bar up with brute force. The steel shifted with a metallic groan, and a sudden, unnatural cold spilled from the seam. The doors hung for a moment, then with a heave, swung wide. What they saw first was chaos. Boxes and pallets had shifted wildly, far more than could be explained by highway bumps. Several had been shoved into the corners, shrink wrap, split, and cardboard torn. Some stood upright, others were toppled, their contents spilled across the floor. As the workers climbed inside, flashlights dancing, they muttered to each other, "No way this just happened from the road." But that wasn't what stopped them cold. All along the inner wall, near the doors, and pressed into the thin film of condensation, were handprints, small, large, some doubled over, as if clutching at the steel. They formed strange patterns, not quite words, but something desperate and deliberate. Lonnie stared, breath shallow. "I didn't put that there," he managed. "No one did." One of the workers called, "Boss, you need to see this." On the floor of the trailer, surrounded by scattered electronics, lay a child's toy, a battered red truck, the kind sold in dollar stores a decade ago. Lonnie recognized it immediately. His son had one, just like it when he was young, lost somewhere on the road years before. He bent to pick it up, fingers trembling. The initials, LW, were scratched on the bottom, in his own careful handwriting, from a night long ago spent marking his boy's name on all his favorite toys before a summer trip. He felt everyone's eyes on him. This can't be here, he whispered. I haven't seen this in years. The one of the workers swallowed, pale. I've heard stories about this route, he said softly. Doors locking from the inside, cargo moved around, weird stuff turning up. Company always says it's a fluke, or the ride, or some prank. His voice trailed off. Lonnie stared at the toy, the handprints, the wrecked cargo. A hollow fear took root deep in his chest, colder than the dawn wind blowing through the open trailer. For a moment, he almost expected to see something move in the shadows at the far end of the box, but there was nothing, just cold, and silence, and the impossible evidence left behind. The dock supervisor ordered everyone out. We'll call this in, he said tightly. You get some rest, Weaver. We'll handle it from here. But Lonnie knew sleep wouldn't come easy, not after a night like this, and not with the feeling that some part of the road, some echo, had hitched a ride with him, locked behind those steel doors all along. Lonnie stood at the edge of the loading bay, staring into the trailer, as if it might breathe or blink. The warehouse crew milled nervously in the early light, none of them eager to step inside again. The air had an odd sharp bite, colder than the morning, cold even for the chill of a steel trailer at dawn. Lonnie rubbed his hands together, still feeling the sting where he'd picked up his son's old toy. The LW, on its underside, stared back at him, like a secret only he could see. Inside, the maintenance men poked through the chaos with crowbars and gloved hands. Boxes were wedged into corners at impossible angles, some split open, spilling tangled wires and dented screens across the metal floor. Doesn't make sense, one muttered. It'd take 3 strong men to shove these like this. And what did this? He pointed at a row of deep scratches running along the aluminum wall, 5, evenly spaced, gouged as if by fingernails or claws. The supervisor snapped photos with his phone. Company's gonna want proof, and an explanation. His voice lacked conviction. One worker crouched by the doors, shining his flashlight up and down the edges. Look, he said, it's not just handprints, there's writing. In the condensation near the locking bar, words had appeared, blurred, and almost illegible. Lonnie squinted, heart pounding. Let us out, help. The letters were streaked, as if someone had written them with frozen fingers, and then smudged them in panic. No one spoke. The trailer, wide open, still felt suffocating. Pull the security footage, the supervisor ordered. I want to know if anyone touched this trailer last night. 2 of the younger men hurried inside, eager to get away from the scene. Lonnie lingered by the doors, unable to leave the threshold. As he stood there, cold sweat slicking his palms, he became aware of a quiet presence beside him. The older maintenance man, gray-haired and lean, watched him with a knowing look. This isn't the first time, is it? He asked quietly. Locked doors, strange cargo, things inside that shouldn't be there. Lonnie shook his head. Never for me. But, I've heard stories. Drivers say the company covers it up. Bad luck, mechanical problems. No one believes them. The old man nodded. Saw a load a few years back. Claw marks in the insulation. A woman's scarf found looped around the bar, even though the seal was unbroken. You never forget it. Lonnie looked at the toy in his hand. This belonged to my son. Lost it years ago. There's no way it could have ended up in this load. Some things ride along, whether you want them to or not, the old man murmured, almost to himself. The sudden commotion near the office drew their attention. The supervisor and a young security tech emerged, pale-faced, clutching a laptop. Cameras glitched out all night, the tech said, voice trembling. No footage after the trailer was sealed, it's just static. 12 hours straight. Same with the lot cams. Like something jammed them. The group fell silent. The implications were too strange, too heavy for anyone to voice. The supervisor cleared his throat. "We'll log this as a mechanical fault. Door's old. Cargo must have shifted." His eyes flicked nervously to Lonnie. "You're cleared for rest, Weaver. Company'll be in touch." Lonnie nodded, numb, and walked toward the break room. The toy clutched tight in his fist, but rest felt impossible. The images replayed in his mind. Handprints and words, deep scratches and impossible cold. He kept feeling the weight of something behind him, something that had ridden in the dark, locked in the steel with the cargo, following him through every turn of the highway. He sat down, phone buzzing with messages from dispatch. He barely saw the words. On the TV above the coffee pot, the morning news played a cheerful story about local high schoolers volunteering at a food pantry. The banality of it felt surreal, distant, as if belonging to another world. A knock at the door jolted him. The older maintenance man poked his head in, eyes steady. "You'll want this." He handed Lonnie a folded slip of paper, an old cargo manifest, yellowed with time, from a delivery 4 years ago. Same dock, same trailer. "Look at the name on the top."
Lonnie opened it. The driver's name was there, scrawled in familiar block letters. Weaver, L. His own signature, but he had no memory of that run. The cargo listed was similar. Electronics, sealed at Northport. In the notes column, a single phrase was typed in red. Unexplained noises, door locked from inside. Item returned, child's doll. Lonnie's mouth went dry. He looked up, but the old man was already gone, leaving him alone with the echoes. He sat back, toy in hand, knowing he would never see the road, or what he hauled behind him, in the same way again. Out in the yard, the trailer doors stood wide, sunlight washing into the dark, and yet the shadows inside didn't seem to fade at all. Lonnie spent the morning in a daze, drifting through paperwork and routine, but nothing about the day felt ordinary anymore. The sunlight slanting through the break room window should have brought comfort, yet it only made the strangeness of the last 12 hours feel sharper, as if what happened in the darkness had left a mark that wouldn't fade. He turned the little red toy truck over and over in his hand, tracing the initials with his thumb, searching for a rational explanation, and finding none. Around him, the warehouse hummed with cautious energy, workers talking in low voices, avoiding the eyes of the man who'd brought in the trailer. No one wanted to open. When dispatch called, Lonnie answered on autopilot. "Yeah, I dropped at Dock 3. Cargo's inside, but you'll need maintenance to sign off." "That trailer needs a checkup," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. There was a pause. "You all right, Weaver?" asked the voice at the other end. A supervisor he barely knew, voice thin and far away. "You sound shaken." Lonnie hesitated. What could he say? That something rode with him on the highway, leaving handprints in condensation and words written in ice. That a toy lost to memory had found its way back in a locked steel box. "Didn't sleep much," he lied at last. "Weird noises. Thought the cargo was loose, but nothing made sense. Get some rest. We'll send you home for the day. Let maintenance handle it." He hung up, set his phone aside, and gazed at the toy again. Even the warehouse coffee tasted odd, bitter, metallic, too thin. Lonnie wondered about the other drivers who'd seen things, the ones who whispered over late-night coffee, or vanished from the company roster with stories that no one wanted to believe. A maintenance man stopped by the break room, gave Lonnie a quick nod, then pressed a crumpled envelope into his palm. "Found this tucked under the seat in your rig. Figured it was yours." The envelope was blank, sealed with a single piece of aging tape. Lonnie peeled it open. Inside was a faded Polaroid, he and his son, grinning in the sunlight, a red toy truck between them on a picnic blanket. Written on the back, in his own looping script, were the words, "For the road ahead. Love, Dad,
Lonnie's chest tightened. He didn't remember packing the photo, didn't remember it being in the rig, and yet there it was, an anchor to the life he'd almost forgotten in the endless string of miles. A commotion outside pulled him from the memory. He stepped out to see the dock crew clustered near the trailer, low voices tense and urgent. The supervisor held a tablet, scrolling through glitching camera footage, static flickers, the timestamp skipping hours at a time. "We're logging this as a malfunction," he told Lonnie when he approached, eyes darting away. "Paperwork's going through, you can head out." But as Lonnie turned to leave, he noticed something strange. A small fresh handprint, pressed into the dusty chrome of his passenger side mirror. Too small for any of the dock crew, too recent to have been there when he parked. He ran his thumb over it, but the print was already fading in the sunlight, vanishing as if it had never existed. He stood for a long moment, staring at his own reflection, and the bright spot where the handprint had been. Something from the night's haul lingered, not entirely gone, not bound by locks or steel. Lonnie didn't believe in curses, but he understood the weight of things left unfinished, the old regrets and the ghosts that ride with you, silent in the dark. He slid into the driver's seat, tucking the photo and the toy into the glove box. He pulled out slowly, passing the open trailer, now just a box of twisted cardboard and scattered electronics, sunlight pouring inside, but failing to warm the shadows in the corners. As he hit the highway, Lonnie kept glancing in the mirrors. Every now and then, as a trick of the light or a glitch in his tired mind, he thought he saw movement, just a flicker, a shape shifting in the reflection. Maybe it was only nerves. Maybe it was the memory of cold breath and soft whispers that would haunt the road behind him for a long, long while. He turned the radio to static and silence, letting the hum of tires and the wind through the cracked window soothe him. The run was over, the delivery done, but something about the locked trailer, the messages scrawled in frost, and the impossible toy would never quite leave. Then as the miles unspooled beneath his wheels, Lonnie Weaver, like so many drivers before him, drove on, changed by a night no paperwork could explain, always listening for the quiet sound of small fingers tapping at steel, and forever wary of what might be riding along, just out of sight, behind locked doors.